Hey everybody, welcome back to the Words of Life podcast with Adam and Kevin. It's been a hot minute since we've done our daily Bible reading. I feel kind of like, isn't there something I'm supposed to be doing today? And, not recording every day. It's been kind of nice, but also like, I don't know, kind of nerve-wracking not doing it, So
Sure.
it's been pretty good though. But we did have the 4th of July weekend here, and it's been pretty busy. A lot of fun stuff going on. How about you guys? Do they allow you to do like real men fireworks out there in Arizona?
I mean, you can't. Theoretically, you're not supposed to launch them from your front yard or anything. No, right? You go and you can buy fireworks at certain stands, but they're the kinds you're going to get. Not that like mortars. However, since we're so close to Mexico, it is not unusual for many people in your neighborhood to have gone across the border at some point, over the previous year and stocked up and to be launching things off in your neighborhood, right?
But it's like contraband, right?
Yeah, a little bit, right? But how much it's,
Yeah.
I've also never seen anyone getting, arrested or pulled over or fined or cited for
it's
launching.
not like
it's a little hard
it's
to
not
track
like there's
down.
much to burn.
Yeah,
there,
and there's
right?
there's lots of there's so many going off too, right? Like how do you track it down? Now, if you do that, so we had a neighbor in the house we used to live in who would get a bunch, whatever, and he would come and he would launch them off. But it wouldn't be on the 4th of July or New Year's Eve or something like this, right? It would be just, oh, it's somebody's birthday and everyone's hanging out block party-ish, and then like, all right, I'm going to launch a bunch of fireworks. And then everyone like runs inside, party's over, right, before the cops show up. If you do it on the 4th of July, it's probably, not a big deal. But so there are, yes, ones that get fired off, certainly anywhere on your street or in your neighborhood.
Yep. Well, we would always have like little block parties in California, but, it was all like fireworks, just the fountains.
Yeah, that you put on the
like
ground,
the biggest thing. You get to put them on the ground and they'd sparkle and ooh, ah. But out here, it's like it's no holes barred, man.
Yeah,
you got mortars and the whole kit and caboodle. And so, I don't know, between the 5 or 6 families that were there was probably $1,000 in fireworks that were spent. And, we had a 30-minute like mortar shell firework extravaganza, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, to be fair, for us, I think we were in bed by 8 o'clock on the 4th of July, because you got a baby, right? It doesn't get dark.
Yeah.
You're not staying up anyway, so...
That's true.
Yeah, we're hanging out indoors pretty much pretty early anyway.
Yeah, crazy. We also went whitewater rafting.
Oh, nice.
Over the weekend. The Ocoee River is just about an hour south of us. It is where one of the Summer Olympics whitewater rafting events was held.
Okay.
And so it's a pretty big deal. They've got all the levels of, all the stages of massively crazy rapids and whatnot. I was up in the front of the raft, one of the point men. And if anybody's ever been rafting before, the nose of the raft gets narrow, and there's 2 people up there. But there's really not a lot to anchor your feet into.
Sure.
Right? And so at one point, I was repositioning myself as we were going kind of down a little bit rapid. I was bracing myself. My left foot slipped, which made me jerk back a little bit. And I just went straight over the raft into the rapids.
Nice.
And it was scary for a hot second there, I didn't really panic, but I was like working hard to get above water.
Sure.
But it was exciting. And then at the very end, our whole raft ended up flipping. We hit a rock that turned us sideways over the rapids, and so it was fun.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, we're gonna do it again August 3rd, I think. So with a whole bunch of people from church. So. Anyway, lots of fun here as we are in the heat of the summer months. But for the podcast, we still haven't clearly decided exactly what direction we're going to go. We have some ideas out there. We've talked about doing the prophets, doing a kind of a broader and yet microscopic view of the prophets, specifically maybe the minor prophets, and we'll talk about the chronological events that are going on with the children of Israel and the results of their sin and the captivities and all that kind of stuff, and these prophets that were sent to them. And so there's a lot of really good lessons to learn through that idea. Another idea is talking about just diving into the book of Proverbs. I say the book of Proverbs, like the collection of Proverbs.
The Proverbs.
The Proverbs, right? And with a focus a subtitle focus or a subheader focus of fatherhood and fatherly advice. Because Proverbs, Solomon wrote these things. A lot of them were directed directly to his son, my son. This is the advice I'd like to give you. And there's a big need these days for fatherly advice, how to be a good man, how to be a good father, how to be a good husband, what things to look out for as we go through this life. So there's some really good ideas there. And I think that's a big need. You know, we've had such the pendulum has swung pretty far on the feminist movement type of thing. And you know, these when you hear these words that are just thrown out there, you know, toxic masculinity and things like that, you hear them so often that you know, sometimes people start believing it.
Yeah, and that would be interesting, right? I mean, certainly there is such a thing as toxic masculinity, right? there are men who are toxic and who act in ways that are contrary to God's desires and laws, which is toxic. But the challenge then becomes what does godly masculinity look like, right?
Yes.
What should that be then, right? If it's not what has become, you know, out of this culture space. So yeah, that would be an interesting one as well to kind of look in and dig in that. Of course.
Yeah. Well, I would say that men can be toxic.
Sure.
Right? And if you want to group the two words masculinity into it, but I think when you talk about masculinity, that generically speaking, it is what makes up a man, you know?
Yeah.
Masculine features, that sort of a thing. So for today, as we continue to decide and kind of hem and haw about what we're going to do next, Kevin and I decided we'd just talk about stuff. And my wife, Megan, was saying, what are you going to record about? I'm like, stuff. So we were chatting a little bit beforehand. Just like we've had such an amazing 6 months studying through the New Testament. And there's been a lot of things that have come our way that we either hadn't thought about previously or hadn't thought about to the level we started thinking about them. And it just sparked a whole bunch of new thoughts, new ideas. And the results of that has been personal growth for me. I'm sure Kevin will say that he's grown a lot through the way we studied the New Testament this last 6 months. And then, of course, we've been able to take the things that we learn and then expand those studies individually to lessons and sermons and things like that. Kevin has the opportunity to preach nearly every week, which is fantastic. I probably average every 6 weeks or so an actual in the congregation type of sermon. And so it's been great. So I was to just kick it off. As we began the year, we just read through the New Testament in order, in canonical order, which means as it is laid out in the Bible. And so we have the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now I've read them all before, but I've never read them back to back at the really nice pacing that was set for our plan. It was just enough every day to digest it, but just fast enough to keep the context fresh. And so I found it really, really beneficial. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I liked going through it, right? Because a lot of times you will, you're studying a book, right? And so you end up getting bogged down, you know, if you're doing a Bible class, like a chapter a week kind of a thing, you know, sometimes, which can slow you down and make you miss the broader picture of the letter or the book. And then sometimes as you're getting further along in the year, certainly, right, you'd read through several books or letters in the same week, right? And so you'd make connections sometimes you didn't see before. And, you know, it was fun also not just to read them, but we get on to talk about, right, what we found was interesting or curious in that week's reading. And so sometimes we mentioned those things, we talked about them on the air, and then we'd kind of move on to the next week, and I'd go back then and say, oh, I'm interested in that, and I'm going to look at that more, right?
Yeah.
After our dialogue and conversation. So not just the reading, but also the conversation, right?
Yeah.
About the reading, I think is really valuable. It's why Bible study is good with other people, right? Wednesday night Bible class or whatever, right, is valuable because there's that sharing of ideas, right, as well. And so that's been something that I thought was really useful as well. And certainly people, you know, that were reading along with us and commenting and things like that would spark ideas. So.
Yep. So I would say that fairly close to the beginning of our reading, we got through the book of Mark. I was really, my brain was going a million miles an hour as we read through Mark. So we just got done reading through Matthew, and Matthew recorded it from a very Jewish perspective. But we get to Mark, and Mark's approach was rapid fire.
Yeah.
Very rapid fire. But all of the things he was talking about was Jesus interacting with people and Jesus caring for people and loving people. But it was the heart of Jesus that really struck out, really popped out to me. And it got me just thinking about the humanity of Jesus. And so that was one of the sermons that came out of this reading for me, was the humanity of Jesus. And as you read through Mark, you can't help but be struck by how much Jesus loved people. But he was surrounded by crowds and like overwhelmed by mobs of people at times. But he loved them, and he never panicked. He never showed any of those things. But, I realized when we were reading through that I had never really just stopped to think about Jesus as a man. Because we read Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He said, let us make man in our image. And we fast forward to like John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Right.
And the Word became flesh and dwelt among men, but the Word was God. And so you think about the deity of Christ. Colossians 1, we studied that a lot. Colossians 1 talks about how amazing that everything that was created for Jesus. I mean, how can you not be in awe of Jesus as God? Hebrews 1, God at various times in various ways spoke to man through his prophets, but then he spoke through his Son, right? And so many places you think about the deity of Christ, and you kind of get overwhelmed, or the balance of who Jesus really was becomes kind of heavy towards that side of things.
Yeah.
And so, it was really a big lesson for me, and I have so much more appreciation for Jesus doing what he did, and just thinking like all the pains and struggles and stubbed toes and splinters and bloody noses, and he probably experienced all those things.
Yeah.
Especially as a carpenter. He had
imagine, right? Yeah.
Right? So, the closer one of the things, the closer we are to our Lord, the more our sins and shortcomings will fill us with deep shame and guilt. The more we know Jesus, the more we'll seek his wisdom, knowledge, and attention. The more we come to love Jesus, the better we will be at loving each other, which is what we're called to be while we're here. And so that was a great lesson.
Yeah, you're mentioning that, and it's reminding me of a couple things, right? And again, these connections you make as you read through the New Testament at some level of pace, right? Hebrews will talk about, as we studied, Jesus' humanity there, right? Right after talking about his divinity, it'll contrast with his humanity, that he's a high priest that can feel all things as we do, right? He's suffered all these kinds of things. And so that's a real, important piece of what he did, right? As you were mentioning that as well, I was thinking, one of the things I did over the time as we talked about this, and it happened for a number of reasons, right? One, because we were reading, but also just based on some interactions in my own life. I was looking at the story of the lost things, right, that you find in Luke. And as you were mentioning there, the humanity of Jesus, when you consider those parable, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then the lost son, right? As you get into that, it's really fascinating the way the whole chapter's set up, right? And I think we miss it a lot of times because we're just jumping to one parable or the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you get this clear pattern, right? That the pattern is that something is lost, then the thing is found, and then there is rejoicing, right? Like this is the pattern. And then you get to the third parable, right? And if you've read the other two and you put them together, right, then you see the twist, you see the difference, right? And so there's several differences there. The one is something is lost by choice, right? Effectively in the third parable, the son decides, I'm going to go out and, right, and take my things and go. Where the other one, the shepherd has lost a sheep, the woman has lost a coin. And then instead of it just being found, right, there's repentance by the son, and it goes back. That's this new twist in the story. And then you see this celebratory result, right? Like the father and his servants rejoice, and he brings the thing, and they're all partying and have a good time. And if you're looking at the pattern of the parable, that the parable should end, right? After he says, come, my son has been found, and they kill the fatted calf, it should end with then Jesus saying, I tell you, such as it is in heaven, right? There'll be more rejoicing over one sinner repent, right? Like that's how it should end. But instead, right, you don't get that there is joy before the angels of God for one sinner repents. You get then the other son, right, who comes in. And this difference here, instead of this joy, is this resentment and this refusal, right? And the point of that story, right, is that forgiveness of those who've wronged us is often the most difficult, right? I can forgive people all day unless they've wronged me personally, right? The reason that we do that, kind of as you were talking about there, the reason that we do that is because we fail to understand that we have all things, right? The Father tells the other son, right? All that I have is yours.
Mm-hmm.
And so when someone wrongs us and they come and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, will you forgive me?" When we refuse to forgive them, it's because we've forgotten that we have all things, right? Because of what Jesus has done for us, because of his suffering, because of his humanity, because of those things and his example, right? We have all things, and so if you sin against me and I refuse to forgive you when you come and repent it, it's because I've forgotten that I already have all things. Right? God has given me all things. All that he has is mine, right? And so what we should do, right, is we should forgive and we should restore the one. The thing that happens, it's interesting, that story is, the only person who's mad and sad and upset in that story is the one who refuses to go in, right?
Right.
He stands outside and he refuses to go in and enter into the joy of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just struck me as interesting, fascinating, right, the way that sort of works out, and again how it connects to all those other things we see about Jesus telling his disciples in Matthew, right, that hey, if you don't forgive, you're under this judgment that's going to come, right, as he's telling the parable of the servants, right. You see it in 2 Corinthians about when he's talking about forgive the one who's offended, right, otherwise you give opportunity to the devil, but you make these connections when you kind of look and see across, reading in not too short order. I saw that next week, right, or the week after that, as opposed to, and look, you can do this, right? I mean, if you're well versed, these things, you make these connections. I'm certainly not saying I've never seen this before, or if you've got a good thesaurus or a Bible program, you can find up all these things, right?
Yeah.
But it strikes you in a very real way as you read it, sort of straight through, in a way that you probably don't necessarily make those connections naturally on your own otherwise.
Well, let me share with you a brand new connection that was just made actually just the other night.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it was Sunday morning, Bible class. Studying through the book of Ephesians, which we read this year, and Galatians and Ephesians are just powerful. But I never once paused, because Paul in chapter 3 talks about grace quite a bit, okay? So this is Ephesians chapter 3, and right near the beginning, Paul's talking, hey, for this reason, I became a prisoner of Christ, paraphrasing here. I've become a prisoner of Christ Jesus for you Gentiles, on behalf of the Gentiles, right? Because he was sent to preach to them, and his pursuit of preaching has put him in prison, basically. He says, assuming that you've heard of the stewardship of God's grace, the stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you. When we think about grace, we often just think about the unmerited, the unearned gift of God of salvation. Like we can't earn salvation towards us, right? So we've been redeemed. Christ has paid the cost for our sins, and it's an unearned, undeserved gift. And that's true. But Paul takes his responsibility to that grace to the next level.
Yeah.
Because he says, I've been given this grace. Well, what grace was that, Paul? I should have been put to death as a murderer and as a reviler of God's word, as a true, it's like, if you think about his level of zeal for following the law, when he realized that he was actually going against God, in his mind and according to the law, he should have been stoned to death for blaspheming against God. So the mindset of Paul is that I am one deserving of death, and I have been redeemed. And I didn't have to pay that price. So what am I going to do about it? And now I'm going to work zealously, right, the other direction. And so it blew my mind thinking about this idea of grace. How often do we think of ourselves as deserving of death? And to hear Paul talk about this stewardship of the grace that was given to him. And he goes on down to verse 7, of this gospel I was made a minister according to the gift of God's grace, which was given to me by the working of his power. To me, though I am the very least of all the saints, this grace was given to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. So again, he correlates this grace as an obligation to spread the good news to everybody else, because they also need the grace of God.
Yeah.
I've never made the connection before that grace also means I'm called to do.
Yeah, I like that idea that you read it there. This that you're stewards of the grace, right? That it's something that you've been given, right, and that you have sort of a fiscal fiduciary responsibility toward, right?
Right.
Like you need to use that in a way. Go and look at any of the steward parables, right, that Jesus teaches, right? It's another thing that you could just be burying in the ground and giving back. Say, here, God, I gave you that which is your own, right?
Like not even any interest? Come on.
That's right. Come on, right? You should have taken that grace and got some interest on it there by bringing some others along with you, right? And yeah, we don't usually think about it as something that we've been given, that we have a responsibility to sort of, we just think of it as a blessing that we have, right?
Yeah.
Not that we have a responsibility toward it.
It's just something that we've been given, right? Yeah. Like a birthday present. Oh,
right.
Thank you very much. I open the present and I get to enjoy it, and, it's awesome, but it doesn't come with any responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So, I was telling you this as well as we were talking about this. And if for those of you who are longtime listeners of the channel there, earlier in the year, towards the very, very beginning, when we read through Matthew, right? So it was week 1, probably, maybe week 2, because it's like Matthew 10. We read through something, and I remember saying it, and I remember Melissa, so my wife listens to these, and she runs a little behind where we're actually at, because she's busy and has babies and things like this, right? But so several months after, then she was at that spot, and we were in the car together, and I heard, oh yeah, I remember saying that, right? And in there's this thing that gets said, and we say it all the time, right? We use it a lot. In Matthew chapter 10, 34 through 39, Jesus says, don't think I've come to bring peace on earth, but I've come to bring a sword. And then this citation that he gives, right? He gives us this quote: "For I've come to set a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against his mother-in-law. A person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me," right? And he goes on to talk about that whoever keeps his life will lose it, and loses it for my sake will keep it, right? And so this thing gets said, right? Brother will deliver father, father child, children rise against parents. He'll say that again in verse 21. So Mark chapter 13, speaking of Mark again, foretelling Jerusalem's destruction, he'll use that phrase again. Jesus says this several times, right? Luke 12, he says it when he's speaking to the crowds. And so this citation appears to be from Micah chapter 7, right? And I remember when we went through this at the time, looking at that and seeing what it says in Micah chapter 7. And in Micah chapter 7, it seems very different, right? Because in Micah 7, the citation is 4 through 7, where it says, the best of them, this is Micah talking about the people, the best of them, or God through Micah, the best of them is like a briar, the most of right of them is a thorn hedge. The day of your watchman, of your punishment has come. Your confusion is at hand. Put no trust in a neighbor. Have no confidence in a friend. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your arms. And then here's the citation: against her mother-in-law and a man's enemies are the enemies of his own house. But as for me, I will look to the Lord, and I will wait for God of my salvation. My God will hear me. And so when you look at that, and I remember thinking of this at the time, like, that's interesting that Jesus takes that citation, but he appears to be using it in a very different way. And he says, hey, don't think I came to bring peace, I came to bring a sword. This is what it will be like, right? And so you're going, okay, so is Jesus like repurposing this? What is he doing here, right? Because the citation there is basically saying, people are already bad, right? People are already bad and terrible. Not that it's going to be that way because he's come, right? And so when I looked at that and thought about that and went back and was reading that, what Jesus is really saying there is he's basically telling those people in his time what verse 7 says there, right? I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me, right? So what he's basically saying is, the state we find ourselves in right now when Jesus was there on the earth is, these are the days of Micah. Right, and so what he's telling them is, the godly have perished from the earth. There's none upright. All these kinds of things. The day of your punishment has come. Put no trust in your neighbor. Right? He's telling those people the days of Micah are at hand, is what he's saying. And he's saying division is coming because judgment is coming on you all. Right? And so the unjust become disarrayed and untrustworthy. But what was fascinating to me when I was looking through that is how much, right? And if we did prophet stuff, it'd be interesting. How much Micah is a prophet that we probably don't think about, but many of the citations and many of the things we understand about the Messiah are from that prophecy, right? Like it is heavy messianic in there. We usually think of Isaiah, right? And we go, Micah is one of those ones we just kind of gloss over, right? It's right before Nahum, right? You just read it in the list. But Micah 4 through 7 is just full of it. Right, with the statement about the nations will come to Zion and the word of the Lord will come from Jerusalem, right? Which we see Jesus saying that's what's going to happen with the spreading the gospel. That's from Micah. They'll beat their swords into plowshares, and even the world knows that kind of language, right? That's from Micah. How do you know that the ruler was going to come from Bethlehem? Herod, the wise men come and say, hey, we've seen his star. Where's he at? And he goes and he asks his people, hey, where's the king supposed to be? And they go and consult the prophecies and come back and say, oh, Bethlehem. That's from Micah chapter 5, right? Like all of these things come from Micah, right? Even in chapter 6, there's this statement there about, Micah saying, what will I give for my sins, right? Burnt offerings, rivers of oil, even my own firstborn, right, would not be sufficient. Right? And so there's all these things that just come out of there that you're like, man, we skip over that book way too often, right? Because it's an Old Testament prophecy. It's not that important, but you got to spend some time in there. And everyone, go read that this week if you've got nothing else to do and you're looking for something to read.
Well, maybe we should do Micah next. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not that long of a book, but go read that, everybody. If you're looking for something to read this week, it's not very many chapters. You can knock it out certainly this week for sure.
Well, one of the things that I do in my study and my prep is I'll listen to gospel music, and I subscribe to YouTube because I obviously record and post there often. So I want to avoid all of the ads, and so we're YouTube Premium members, right? Yeah. And so that comes with YouTube Music, ad free, unlimited for the whole family, which is kind of a nice perk. Not that I'm advertising for YouTube.
Yeah, sure.
But no, so sometimes YouTube just starts playing stuff, right?
Sure.
Without you searching for it. And this artist named Stephen McWhirter popped on there. And, it was one of the more, I found out later, it's one of the more obscure recordings of his. But he's got this song that he wrote called Come, Jesus, Come. And I was listening to this song, and it really blew my mind. And the recording that YouTube played for me happened to be one where it was a live recording, where he was on stage just playing chords on the piano and just talking about what made him write this song.
Sure.
And so when he talks about this song, and he says, I was studying through Revelation, and we got to the end.
Very end, yeah.
Right? And he says at the very end, John's saying, come, Jesus.
Right.
We want you to come now. And he realized in that moment that it was hard for him to actually hold that sentiment with 100% like optimism and clarity, which did a little soul searching, so why is that? And he realized that he was just a little too attached to be in this world. And so he wrote this song, and some of the words are pretty powerful. It says, come, Jesus, come. We've been waiting so long, right? But he says, sometimes I fall on my knees and pray, come, Jesus, come. Let today be the day. So he's really writing this song to counteract his previous attitude and to hopefully change that mindset. It says, for the day you return to heal every hurt and right every wrong. And the way he wrote it, it carries a lot of hope, but also a lot of heartache. And it's like somebody who's done being satisfied with this world and is really a believer who's looking for the next, which is what we're called to as we read through the scriptures. And so this idea that spurred me on to look at that idea, that concept, which ended up being a study of the Spirit. One thing leads to another.
Yeah.
And it ended up being the part 2 of a sermon that I preached the year before, which was a deep dive into baptism. Because we find the role of the Spirit so prevalent through the idea of baptism and what happens after baptism. So the first sermon was basically that baptism is like a 3-in-1 event. The baptism was a funeral where we are burying the old man. We're putting the old man of sin to death. It's a birth. Jesus said to Nicodemus,
born again, right?
You got to be born again, right, through water and the Spirit, right? And you're raised to newness of life. So it's a birth, but it's also a wedding, as we are joined to the body of Christ as his bride, as it talks about in Revelation and other places, right? That we are we're the body and the bride of Christ. And so we have this idea that we're now in a committed relationship with Jesus, similar to a marriage. But that's where that first sermon kind of ended, was just talking about what baptism is. But this second sermon part two is like baptism is just the starting line of the race that we're in for the rest of our life. And so it's where we begin a race and we're called to finish faithfully. That's where baptism starts, and that's the starting line of the race of life. And so it was a great study for me, just going through and noting all of the instances we talk about the Spirit. It gave me a chance to go back and to realize that God always intended to put in us His Spirit. Right? I go back to Ezekiel.
Yeah.
I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you'll be clean from all your uncleanness. I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. And so God always intended, and there's so many other verses throughout the Old Testament that are then requoted, like in the book of Acts and things like that, that just talk about the fact that the Spirit's going to come and He's going to fulfill all the prophecies and fulfill God's ultimate wish for us is to have Christ and the Spirit in us, So it was great. It was a great study.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because that idea that it always was God's plan. We sometimes will think about the old law and what was it supposed to do and what was it, right? And there are things that are true when we say that, right? Like it's clear. It says the old law was intended to show your sin, right? Like that was its purpose. It was a school teacher to bring you to Christ, right? At least sort of ideas. But sometimes we sort of think, we get in this mindset of the old law was broken or flawed in some way. Or God didn't care about the heart under the old law. It was just about keeping the rules and showing that you couldn't do it, right? Yeah. And it's bizarre because again, we read all the New Testament this year, and Romans 9, and this is one of the ones I had done. Romans 9 and 10 we'll talk about this idea a little bit when he's talking about the Jew and the Gentile, and the Gentiles who didn't pursue righteousness attained it, but Israel who pursued the law did not attain righteousness, right? And the question he asks there is why? Like, why didn't they do that? And he answers it for you, because they didn't pursue it by faith, but as it were based on work. And so they stumbled over the stumbling stone, right? And so Paul's point there is not, we sometimes, people will come to Romans and say, see, he's making this whole new theology. And what he's really saying is, no. It was supposed to be pursued by faith. The old law was supposed to be pursued by faith. It was never supposed to be this, I do the works, right? Israel pursued it through the law. They didn't pursue it through faith. And so they stumbled over the rock of offense, right? And then you get that citation, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, right? Whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. And what he's saying is because they pursued the law, the works of the law, they missed out on faith in the promised Messiah, right? And so that's where their disconnect, right? And so when Jesus shows up, right, this thing that happens that's somewhat interesting is that they lacked belief in Jesus as the Christ. Right, like they'll say, people will say, hey, we know you're from God, right? No one can do the works that you do, right? But they fail to believe that He is the Christ, right? That He's the Messiah, that He's the one that's coming. And mostly that idea is because they had this sort of zeal for God, right? So chapter 10 of Romans, and we'll tell you, right, this is pretty famous as well. Paul says, my heart's desires for Israel to be saved. They have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge, right? And this statement that he makes is incredibly powerful today as well. Being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they didn't submit to God's righteousness, right? And so what he's saying is they had this zeal for God. They had it as He did. The problem was they sought their own righteousness instead of God's righteousness, right? Mm-hmm. And that idea is, what is the righteousness of God if it's not the law itself, right? But they never saw, as chapter 10 will go on to say, that the end, Christ is the end of the law, right? The culmination, the goal, the end of it was always Messiah, right? For those who, believe in Him. Mm-hmm. And so, that idea that God's intent, His plan was always that there would be faith in Him, there would be faith in the Christ, there would be faith in that He would put the Spirit within us. That was always the plan, and we mess that up. Yeah. Even today, when we seek to establish our own righteousness, right? Yep. Then we fail, then we stumble, then we have the same problems they always had, right? If you're not seeking Jesus, you're seeking self, right? There's only sort of two options there. But it was always the intent of the plan, right? It becomes very clear as you sort of read through the New Testament. You can see that up here.
Yeah, I mean, even right in the beginning of some of the Gospels, like John 4, famous verse, God is spirit,
Right.
and those who worship him must worship him in what? In spirit and in truth, right? And sometimes we just get that wrong, or we try to worship by feeling only, and with a lack of knowledge, or sometimes too much knowledge and not enough feeling.
Yeah, there's no spirit, only truth.
No spirit, only truth. So there's definitely a balance, it's called, throughout the scriptures for us. And I mean, even in life, how many times do we read? I mean, it's not a major theme, but we read about just middle of the road, happy living.
Yeah.
Not rich, not poor, right? But we just live quiet, peaceful lives, right? And so we can do that, and we can find peace. You talk about just thematically speaking, like just the idea of being content. Paul teaches that I found the secret, guys.
Yeah.
Whether I'm poor or rich, whether I'm abounding in blessings or I'm in prison, I found the secret to being okay, no matter where I'm at.
Yeah. And I love that verse, right? In that it's so often misapplied, right? Yeah. Hey, you just won the NBA championship. Well, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? No, that's not the meaning of that verse, right? Nope. The meaning of that verse is I can be rich or poor. I can be content in whatever circumstance I find myself, right?
Yeah.
Because Jesus strengthens me, right? So when things are bad, he strengthens me. When he's good, he strengthens me. Not that he gave me the strength to be successful and rich and celebrity and accolades and all these sorts of things. Now, again, don't get me wrong. It's great that you're trying to give attribution to Jesus, right? I appreciate that. But
yes,
the purpose of that verse is not only to say it when you win, right? Yeah. You should also say it when you lose.
Well, that's the crazy thing we're reading through Paul, especially these prison epistles. We're talking about, Galatians and Ephesians and Philippians and Colossians and all these great epistles that we have from him. The guy's in prison.
Yeah.
Writing such optimistic, great things. But prison doesn't matter, because when he says in Philippians that, may the peace of Christ that passes all understanding.
Yeah.
Right? Well, what is that? Well, that's knowing that you've got a home secure in heaven after this life. So what's there to bother me about?
Yeah.
I have ultimate peace because I know I have a home in heaven. And that's the place to strive towards,
Yeah, and that just goes back to like what we were saying about the prodigal son story, right? All that I have is yours, right? Every time that we mess up this life, it's because we fail to understand that all that God has is ours, right? And all of this then doesn't really matter, right? You have all things, everything that He has is yours as His child. And when we forget that and lose sight of that, then we run into all kinds of problems. Lack of forgiveness, malcontentment with our own life, succumbing to different sorts of sufferings and tribulations, right, and not remaining steadfast in them. It's all coming from that same problem, right? A failure to understand the perspective that we have all these things.
Absolutely. All right. Anything else that came out? I mean, there's a whole bunch. I've got
I
got a whole stack. Whole stack of outlines here. Could go through. I was able to refresh an older sermon that I had done because of our reading this time, the "I'm Going Fishing"
there you go. Yes.
sermon. It's a pretty good one. It was basically the story of Peter, and after Jesus was died and resurrected, he's already seen.
He's seen him already, right?
Go
up here and wait for me, right?
I don't know what he was like.
Yeah.
Still just confused. I don't know what's going on, but he just says, "I'm going fishing."
Yeah.
Kind of out of the blue. And he doesn't go fishing for men, and that's the point of my sermon, is that because we're way at the beginning, Jesus said, "Hey, Peter, I'm going to make you fishers of men." You and your brothers and your friends here. And Peter just doesn't get it until he finally does.
Yeah.
And then you go full circle. Peter betrays Jesus, and he denies him how many times?
3.
He denies him 3 times. And Jesus said, "You're going to deny me 3 times." And you can imagine the distress Peter was in. Probably that statement of Jesus reverberating in his head over and over and over again. Before the rooster crows, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. I can imagine him having nightmares after the fact about how distraught he might have been, right? So then they're out fishing. Jesus shows up on the shore and he says, "Hey, you guys caught any fish?" Right? "Nope, been out all night, haven't caught a thing." "Hey, throw your net on the other side." Right? Complete
Yeah.
repeat of what happened to him at the first. And of course, we know the story. Peter jumps out of the water in all of his clothes, just swims.
Yeah.
He makes the other guys pull the boat in. He's going to win the race this time. He's not going to let John beat him.
Right.
Right. And so Jesus is there with probably an amazing barbecue. Got fish on the fire, and cooks him this great meal. And then you have this amazing story, this amazing moment between Jesus and Peter, where Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Hey Peter, do you love me?" And then he keeps telling him, "Hey, feed my sheep, tend my sheep, feed my flock." He says, "Peter, it's going to be your job because I'm leaving. You have to take over and be the one that feeds the people." And it's an amazing, story of forgiveness, of restoration, of passing of the torch, of, this is beautiful. When you think about all of the things that it represents for Peter, and then to know the outcome of Peter's life, the results of his work in the Lord, and how much good he did in the kingdom. It's a great story, but it encourages us to what are we doing?
Right.
Sometimes are we distracted? Are we depressed for the bad things in life? Or are we going to just remember that Jesus also gave us a calling to go and preach and, feed the widows and the orphans and all the things?
Yeah.
I love the full circle completion of the story of Peter with Jesus on the beach there. It's beautiful.
Nice.
Is that it?
I think so. I think
okay.
It's a wrap on the first 6 months of the year.
It's a wrap, from Matthew to Revelation. So I love what I always hear the guys at the Unashamed podcast say when they describe the Bible. Hey, listen, there's 3 sections: Genesis to Malachi. It's all about Jesus is coming. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus is here. Acts through Revelation. He's coming again.
That's right.
And so that is the Bible in a nutshell. It's all about Jesus. And we live in the time where we are hoping that we can say, "Jesus, come," every day and really believe it and know it with confidence, because we have our hope secured in him. And I can say that the more we study, the more I'm in the Word, the more confidence I get. So we encourage you to stick your nose in the Bible, get in there every day and read it. And hopefully our channel is a benefit, as a tool for you to be encouraged to do that more and more. So final words, Kev?
I think that was it. I think that's good.
Okay.
Go read something this week, everybody.
Go read something. Go read Micah.
That's right.
Kevin says go read Micah. So maybe we'll tackle Micah next. Is that a good one chronologically speaking? Just to start with Micah?
I don't know, chronologically.
We're going to have to figure it out. But Micah will be included. I've now made a decision.
Right,
we're going to do something including Micah.
All right.
So look forward to that coming soon. But all right, God bless everybody. Have a great week. Make it a good one. Put God first. See y'all.